Good evening. My name is Tom Giroux with Forest History Association of Wisconsin. I'd like to welcome you to our monthly webinar series. But first, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Forest History Association of Wisconsin. Our mission is to inform, educate, archive, and publish. So each one of those elements is part of our goal and mission for the organization. And these webinars are an effort to educate and inform the public about the history, and particularly the forest history of the state of Wisconsin, which is really quite interesting, vibrant, and a lot of information. Our website is, I'll drop that in the chat, but there's lots of information on our website, including how to become a member. If you support our mission, it's only $20 a year, and you'll help us put on these webinars. We hold an annual conference. We do publish our proceedings every year from our conference. So if you'd like to support us, we certainly would appreciate it if you'd go on to our website and sign up to become a member. I'm here with my coworkers, Don Schnitzler and Becky Gaskill, and I'm going to turn it over to Don to introduce our speaker.
Okay. In addition to being one of Tom's coworkers here, I'm also a member of the Forest History Association Board of Directors, and I'm pleased to welcome everyone to the webinar tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversation about chainsaws and Jim Card's presentation. It should be really good. If you're new to Zoom and you have any problems tonight, you can reach out to Tom, Becky, or I by going down at the bottom of the screen. There's a little chat box, and you could put a comment in there. We'll pay attention to what's going on during the presentation. If you have a question there, just put it there and we will try to answer it for you. Also, to aid in the success of the webinar, any questions that you have for the speaker as he's talking tonight, feel free to jot them down in the same chat feature. And then at the end of the conversation, Becky, Tom, or I will direct the questions to our guest speaker tonight. This evening's presentation is titled "The Chainsaw, the Most Versatile Power Tool in the World." It's a presentation about how the chainsaw revolutionized the logging industry and found its way out of the forest. Loggers were the first to acquire chainsaws for personal use around their farms and homesteads, and as chainsaws were refined over the years, it was adopted for other uses: art, war, sports, conservation, entertainment, and numerous other industries. Our speaker tonight is James Card. He has written for the New York Times, for Rolling Stone, Foreign Policy, and other national publications. He is the only journalist in history to have stories about ice fishing and deer hunting on the front page of the New York Times. I think that would be a good story by itself. Between stints as a magazine editor and a journalist, Card has worked as a line clearance tree faller. He is also the author of Chainsaw Love, Field Notes on the World's Most Dynamic Power Tool, and the Dawn Patrol Diaries, recounting his experience in South Korea's as South Korea's only fly fishing guide. He lives in central Wisconsin and cuts firewood with a chainsaw throughout the year. I know we're all looking forward to Jim's talk tonight, so I'm going to turn this over to Jim. Jim, welcome to the Forest History Association's webinar.
Thanks for having me, Don. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'll get started. The first photo that you're looking at on your screen is a right-of-way for a transmission line. It's the A105 going through central Wisconsin near Wapaka. In between journalism jobs, I got a CDL, and that I used for joining up with Asplund. It's the biggest line clearance tree trimming company in the United States, if not the world. You see their orange trucks pretty much all over the place. And that's because they work all over the nation. Wherever these lines go, that's where they go. Now, if you look at that line, it's nicely trimmed. There's not a single branch or tree leaning towards these transmission lines. That means there's an entire army of tree trimmers out there every day across the United States, keeping Mother Nature in check. And the primary weapon they use are chainsaws. They also use a lot of other tools. There's pole saws and bucket trucks. And if they can't get a vehicle back there, then you got to hike in with climbing gear and climb up to the branch that's sticking towards the power line and cut it off with a small chainsaw or a handsaw. So I did that for a couple of years, and it gave me the idea for this book. It made me realize how important chainsaws are in keeping the electricity on in the United States of America. After every after every thunderstorm or ice storm or tornado, there's power lines down everywhere and blackouts. The biggest blackout in the United States happened from a tree touching the line. That was the blackout of 2003. I mentioned it in the book. And that took out a lot of the eastern part of the United States and some of Canada. I believe Wisconsin was untouched. I was out of the country at that time. All of that could have been prevented by 3 cuts with the chainsaw, 2 for the notch cut, 1 for the back cut, and all of that would have never happened. That's how important this work is. Grid down scenarios are something that nobody wants to have happen. So that was our job. And it got me thinking a lot about chainsaws. I learned a lot about their handling, use, and repair because the company has an apprenticeship-like program. You get this huge book. It's like a Bible-sized book where you have to learn all the functions of chainsaws and also learning things about the electrical grid, substations, tree climbing, everything like that. It's a really fascinating occupation. So that got me started, and that was the genesis for this book. So let's start with the history of the chainsaw. And now, people were messing around. Well, first, let me say the chainsaw was created to reduce human suffering in the form of grueling manual labor. If you've seen a 2-man cross-cut saw, one guy on one end, the other guy on the other end, pushing back and forth. The nickname of that tool was called the misery whip. And that was a pretty accurate term because that's how gruesome and toilsome that work is. So the invention of the chainsaw is a lot like the automobile. There were many people all over the world tinkering around with the so-called horseless carriage. And the saw, there are different names for the prototype chainsaws. There was this concept of an endless saw, a saw that is constantly in motion, very much like a band saw that you would see today in a woodworking workshop. That's the ideas that they were playing around with. There was one invention, and this would probably be the earliest chainsaw. It was not motorized. It was invented by a doctor and patented, and it was for cutting some bone during childbirth. The tool looked like a hand-cranked egg beater. So you hold it in both hands. With one hand, you turn a crank, and then that crank sends out a little chain around a bar, circles around and around, and the little teeth cut through the bone, which had to be one of the most painful things to experience ever. that was one, but then the inventions and prototypes and patents were still very unpractical for a long, long time. A lot of those early prototypes were dragged out into the woods, requiring horses, or by that time, some primitive automobiles. And they were just too cumbersome. They could cut, but by the time you get the machine set up next to the tree, you might as well just cut it down by hand. So again, very much like the automobile, all that technology just kept getting more and more and more refined. Some of the better ones that were dragged out into the woods could only be used making a horizontal cut. That would be for the felling part of the cutting operation. And then once it's on the ground, then there would be a saw to make a vertical cut in order to buck the logs. And of course, still, you would need the lumberjacks with axes to delimb the tree and take all the limbs off. So there's still a lot of work involved. So one of the other saws, the first saw that looked like what we see today as a chainsaw, is the Wright power saw. And all that is a reciprocating saw, much like the Sawzall that we all know today. And that was a saw that just simply went back and forth. So that was another kind of chainsaw-like concept. Now, the person that really, truly earns the title of the godfather of chainsaw innovation is Andre Stihl in Germany. He's the guy that really brought it all together. And he did that by turning the chainsaw into a manageable tool for one person. Some of the early prototypes, and you see in this picture, are the two-man saws. Here is the power head. Look at that, there's two handles, and then over on this side is another handle for somebody to hold on to. Over here is a handle for somebody to grip, and then the fellow over here controls the power and output. And there's another two-man saw right there. So that at the time, that was like the best they had. Stihl, he was able to get rid of this part and reduce it and make it smaller so that it could be managed by one man alone. And eventually that design started to look like these saws over on the other side. He just kept reducing, and refining it. Then World War II came along, and Stihl was co-opted by the Nazi regime. Kind of like a lot of other industrialists, they were forced to join the war effort. With the United States at war, well then, since we're at Germany, then who cares about German patents, right? So what happened is a lot of American manufacturers took Stihl's designs and ripped them off, basically, and started incorporating his ideas into their saws. When World War II ended, it was the start of the golden age of chainsaw innovation. Again, it was at that time a race to make the saws smaller and lighter and better refined. So that was the biggest turning point in chainsaw history, is Stihl's one-man saw, getting it down and reduced to that size. The second most important thing was the invention of the Oregon chain. Mr. Cox was a lumberjack who noticed some bugs, some insects, I think it was a type of a beetle, chewing through some pine stump. He got a magnifying glass out and he studied how they were cutting. They're leaving sawdust in their tracks. And he noticed how their teeth would go one way and another way. Before this, the chains on a chainsaw were called scratcher teeth. So when you look at a saw, you think of a bunch of upside down little triangles, and that's the teeth of a saw. And that's what they kind of were like back then. And they just scratch back and forth, back and forth. Well, Mr. Cox, with his study and observation of these wood-eating beetles, thought that you could take the teeth and make them slightly curved and hooked. And you position the teeth one way. Here's an example in this logo, the teeth going one way, and then you have the tooth behind it pointing the other way. And it has more of a gouging effect. And that revolutionized everything. This company, both Steel chainsaws and Oregon, are very alive and profitable to this day. Unlike many other chainsaw manufacturers, there was a whole bunch of them and many fell by the wayside. But this company still makes chains that you can buy at Fleet Farm. So those are the two key turning points in chainsaw history. That's what you need to know for a basic overview, like a 10,000-foot view on how chainsaws were developed. It was also very much another comparison besides the automobile is it was a lot like Silicon Valley. Before Silicon Valley and the ascendance of Microsoft Windows, computers were tools used by scientists and in laboratories and big businesses. But Silicon Valley brought us the personal computer. And it was the same thing with chainsaws. Chainsaws were something that lumberjacks used and nobody else. As the chainsaw became smaller and more user-friendly, and also armed with the Oregon chain, then it really took off, just like personal computers going into everyone's home. And now chainsaws are in millions of garages and workshops and barns and tool sheds all over the country. It was the same kind of development. The lumberjacks that were using the early chainsaws realized how useful they are, so they bought their own. And they brought them home to cut firewood and, cut up dead fallen trees in their fields and stuff like that. And that's how it slowly took off. The chainsaw was refined by many developments. Right here, we're looking at the chainsaw dogs. There's a lot of different nicknames for them, felling spikes. And those are pressed against the log to help stabilize the saw. And it gives you a little bit of leverage when you're cutting into it. There were other refinements over the years. The chainsaw overall became smaller. The bars came in different sizes. But one of them was the anti-vibration features. The early saws would vibrate so terribly that it would cause this condition that would turn your hands white. It was like a kind of arthritic type condition. OSHA recognizes it as a malady. So if you look at a modern chainsaw, you'll see little springs and rubber buffers on there, and they reduce the vibration. So it's really hardly noticeable at all. That was one safety feature. Another one is the position of the handguard, and also the 2-point throttle. That's where you pull the kind of like a trigger, but also you have to depress a button next to it. Another one is the overall shape. Let's see. Oh, okay. Well, here's one. This is a left-handed chainsaw. They're very rare. And chainsaws today, the bar is on this side of the power head. So if you're a lefty, you're kind of out of luck. you're going to have to get used to using a chainsaw as a right-handed operator. That's just the way it is, but there's a reason for it. And we'll get to that in a moment. So up here, some of these placement of these bars where you grip and hold in an ergonomic way that is both safe and easy for the operator. That was another safety feature. Also, the on-off switch that kills the engine. That was another one. That's, you can turn it off quickly. So then we'll go to the bow saw. This is Dan Stuckman. He's a fellow who I interviewed, and he restores old chainsaws. I visited him at his home and workshop, and he brought out this bow saw. Now, this was one of the early designs, the chain wrapped around this track. And that's how it cut. This is before somebody came up with the idea of just simply having a metal bar right here. Again, it was people thinking of this idea of the endless saw, a saw that is constantly revolving around and cutting. And that was the concept many people were playing with. This was put into use, I believe, I think it was Poland that invented this, and he was down south. And if I remember right, they were used on chain gangs. I think during the war, he had prisoners using them cutting brush. Mr. Stuckman there, he fired it up and it cut just fine. I tried it out too, and it was actually not too bad of a saw to work with. If I had to, say, cut some of those logs that are in front of him, I would happily do it with that saw. I was very impressed on how it worked, even though the shape is kind of weird and unwieldy. So if I can get that up there. All right, this is kind of like a spray chart in baseball, where in baseball, it's a prediction of where balls are likely to be hit into the outfield. This is a chart of where you're most likely to be struck with a chainsaw when you're using it. It's the accident locations where you're hit. Down in the leg area, that's probably where you're cutting brush and limbing tree branches. This left hand is where you would be holding on the top of the top safety handle. Notice the right hand is where you're holding the throttle. This whole area is completely untouched. But look at this is the curious part, the left side of the head. Now, that is from most likely kickback. Kickback is when the bottom tip of the bar touches an object that will throw the bar back towards the operator. It's the one part of a chainsaw that you have to be very aware of. There are some chains that have some kind of anti-kickback design, but that does not protect you. You have to be aware of that front lower tip of the bar while you're cutting. There's a few YouTube videos I've seen where it shows that in action. You can look it up with a keyword search of chainsaw kickback, and you'll get a pretty good idea of what it looks like. I've had it happen to me many, many times. It never has come close to my head, but it's more of like a jolting pop when you strike something with that lower end tip of the bar. It's very noticeable. But what that means is you're not in control of the saw. So if the bar was placed on the opposite side of the power head, then those strikes would be coming directly into your face, right in the middle, right up your nose, pretty much. So that explains. I still don't figure out why the guy, the figure in the picture there, his left hand is so bloodied up, and I guess that's some people, it's like touching a hot stove. They got to do it a couple times until they learn their lesson or something like that. So right here is Cyrus Johnson. He is a saw mechanic in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and his specialty is porting chainsaws. Porting a chainsaw is a modification to make it more powerful. He can take a 50cc saw and turn it into a 70cc saw without any noticeable cosmetic difference. You would not know it by looking at it. However, you would know it once you turned it on and started cutting. It's the equivalent of the chainsaw equivalent of the films Fast and Furious. From looking at them from the street, they look kind of like normal cars, but once they get going, they're extremely powerful cars. It's kind of the same idea. So Mr. Johnston here was at Simcoe. That's the Union Threshery in central Wisconsin. It's a weekend celebration of old farm machinery and stuff like that. And they had a chainsaw cutting competition. Both modern saws and antique saws were present. And the saws were in different categories according to their engine capacity. And the job or the contest was to cut down once, cut up once, and cut down again. So that's 3 cuts, 3 little cookies cut off the end of that log, and then they're timed. Mr. Johnston here won multiple categories with his hot saws. His work is really impressive. People from all over the country, including Canada, ship him their saws to make them faster. He basically makes hot rod chainsaws. There are some other designs that have I believe it's called a diffusion cone, and that looks like a gigantic exhaust pipe sticking out the side of the chainsaw. But that's getting pretty far out there in design. There's a lot of ways that the chainsaw is modified. Here's one. Bob's Engine Service is one, and the other one is it Pete, I believe. Both of them are in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And as far as I know, they're the only machine shops, maybe in the world, that modify chainsaws for cutting ice. If you're from Wisconsin, you probably are familiar with the great tradition of spearing sturgeon on Lake Winnebago. And that's their main customer base. Over here at the power head, you notice a grease gun that's attached. That's one of the main features of lubricating the saw as they're cutting through what could be, 2 feet of ice or more. Then they put a lot of different seals up around the power head so water can't get in there. They also modify the chain. They file down the teeth in a specific pattern to make it cutting through ice much easier. Here's another modification. Chainsaws, again, are so versatile tools. Here, this is in the hands of Ben Bushke, a chainsaw carver I know. He has what's called a gouger. And that, if you look at the stripes right here, it just gouges up the wood. This is about the size of a hockey puck, and there's little grooves in here, sharp little grooves that just gouge it up. It's belt driven, and that wheel just spins, and he gouges up this tree stump. I think he was carving, turning a tree. He was carving, I believe, an owl that is nesting inside of a tree. That was the start of this project. But you could take that and put it up here on the surface of the log and gouge out a big depression if you want to make something like a bowl, something like that. So that's another accessory. This is from Mr. Stuckman's collection. This is a Lear Charger. If the name Lear is familiar, Lear Jets, the gentleman that owned that company invented this for bush pilots stuck out in the middle of nowhere and needed to charge a battery. The charging mechanism attaches to the power head. You rev up your chainsaw, and that provides the juice to charge up a battery for a car, or in his case, an airplane. Now, there's other attachments that make the chainsaw the most versatile power tool in the world. Another one is the Lewis winch, which it's a winch that you would have on an ATV or a pickup truck. That mounts to the power head of the chainsaw. And then you take a chain or a rope and hook that up to an anchor point, most likely a tree. And then you pull out the cable from the winch, hook it to whatever heavy object you need to remove or pull on, and then rev up the saw. And the saw powers the winch and pulls in the heavy object that you want to move. I've also seen attachments that transform chainsaws into power augers. The power augers can be used for ice fishing, for drilling holes, or as an auger for drilling out post holes. Another attachment is a debarker, and that is a lot similar to the gouger. It has kind of a belt drive, but up here, this area looks up by the end of the bar, that looks like kind of like a lawnmower. And you run it over the surface of a tree and it eats up the bark unbelievably well. It's like a lawnmower. You're shaving the tree and removing all the bark. That's for people that probably want to use the logs for some decorative purpose, such as live edge furniture or making like posts on a stairway, something like that. Very handy tool. And then we get to one of the coolest uses of a chainsaw. And again, this is what makes it so versatile. This is a chainsaw mill, and it's basically a guide frame. Over here's the chainsaw, and you need a pretty large saw to do this, at least 75 cc's, and then with a bar that surpasses the log that you want to cut into. So there's a few tricks to this, but overall it's pretty simple. It's a guide that helps you cut horizontally along the log to create boards. Big, beautiful slabs, thin or thick, whatever you want. It's total freedom for all of your woodworking dreams and visions. This fellow who I interviewed is a gentleman that has a cabin, or no, he wants to build a cabin on a wooded property in Wittenberg, Wisconsin. His dream is to use wood harvested off of his land to do it. And he's well started on his way. He has multiple planks, boards, posts, drying out as we speak. He already made a beautiful outhouse from wood that he milled from his land. His land is a recreational property for him and his family. So that's one man kind of pursuing his dream with the chainsaw. The milling, you just move the power head and the bar and the frame along the edge of the log at a desired thickness. It is a slow process. You got to kind of take your time with it. You can't be rushed. The very first cut is the top of the log, which is kind of a rounded slab that most people would probably throw away or cut into firewood. But after that, then you start cutting the boards that you want. What's cool about that is it's like a treasure hunt. When you're cutting through these trees, you're not sure what you're going to find. You could find something terrible, such as barbed wire that has grown into the trees. Maybe you're cutting through a lead bullet from a deer hunter that shot and missed a deer from long ago. But also you can find all kinds of cool features, spalted maple, bird's eye maple, and really cool grains and whorls and patterns like that from the interior of a tree. You can really capture its beauty with this. And then another modification, probably the biggest technological advance in chainsaws since Mr. Cox invented the Oregon chain and still made the chainsaw into a one-man tool. And that is adding battery power instead of gas power to the saw. That's the newest development in chainsaw design. And in the last few years, I've been seeing them pop up everywhere. All the tool makers are cranking them out in different shapes and sizes. This one I picked up in 2015. I beat the hell out of it and it's still running pretty good. Other than I had to replace a battery that was dying out. The beauty of electric chainsaws, I would suggest them to anyone for backyard use. They're just so handy. They're so quiet. You do not need to use ear protection. You should have eye protection and chainsaw chaps, just like you would with the gas-powered saw. But they're very quiet. You're not going to piss off the neighbors using one of these. But they are underpowered for the big work. That's their biggest drawback. Even if you were to put a larger bar on there, it's still not going to cut as powerfully as a gas-powered saw. But it is very handy for cutting up the small stuff. You have a little blowdown after a storm, this should take care of it just fine. The biggest drawbacks, though, is keeping the battery powered. So if you're in a remote area, say like up at your cabin, maybe you don't have electricity, so you have a generator, perhaps, you got to figure out how to keep those batteries charged for a weekend worth of work. And that can be troublesome. It can be a logistical nightmare trying to figure that out. Gas, however, you just bring up an extra can of gas and some bar oil and you're good for the weekend. So with remote teams like wildland firefighters, line clearance tree trimmers, any type of chainsaw work that takes you out to remote areas, gas is always going to be the way to go. Just because you can't backpack in all these heavy batteries and then they die on you. It just doesn't really work that well. The batteries don't get any lighter on the hike out, but an empty gas can does. So I highly recommend these saws. They're super useful around the house, but for the big work, have your gas-powered saw. I would say a good combo would be one of these electric saws with a 14-inch bar, and then a gas-powered saw of around 50 or 75 cc with like a 20-inch bar or more, or whatever you need. And with those two things, you can get a lot of work done. Okay, again, in the world of carving, take a look at this bar. See how it's angled and pointy, kind of triangular? That's another development. Most of the bars are perfectly rounded and shaped. This one comes to a really tight point. It requires a chain that's specially matched for that bar. And that is for this chainsaw carver to get in there and make these really perfect, fine cuts. You can't do that with a bigger rounded nose. These bars come in different sizes and they're measured by the size of coins. There's like a dime-sized one, and that's in terms of size and roundness. I think there's one called a toonie that refers to the Canadian coin. So the chainsaw carvers do all this really interesting stuff. They are unbelievable artists. I have nothing but respect and admiration for their talents. But after researching the book, going up to Eau Claire to the U.S. Chainsaw Carving Championships, where people from around the world were carving, I started to get the itch to use my chainsaw to make something other than firewood. So that fall, I was sitting in my hunting stand, and I had a lot of time to think, and I had a lot of trees to look at to let my imagination roam. And so I came up with making a basic chair. And this is a fun chainsaw project for anyone. Very easy to do. You just need a tree that is co-joined near the ground. By co-joined, I mean like forked. So you would want one trunk going up at an angle and another trunk going up straight or maybe a little bit at an angle. You fell both of the trunks. This one cut normally as you would, and then flush off the crusty part of the notch cut so it's smooth, and that's your seat. On the other side, you want to make your notch and back cut up higher so that you can form the backrest of the chair. Once that part of the tree is off, then you make a horizontal cut to make the back side of the chair flat, and then cut it off at the bottom. So now you just made your backrest. You have your seat. Maybe you need to even things out a little bit. And then at the very end, you just simply cut it off at the base. It's a pretty heavy chair. It's something that, you can cut up, toss out by the campfire, and just let it sit there. You can protect it with some finishing preservative oil, but it's a pretty simple thing to do if you need some chairs around a campfire. And if you get sick of it, just throw it in the campfire. Another fun little project is an ottoman, or like a footrest or a little stool. This is the first one I made. It looks pretty rough, but these legs are cut upside down. So imagine you have a tree stump that is, say, around waist high. And then if this thing is flipped over, you make some cuts into the top of the stump, cutting down to your desired depth, right about here. And you make them in a crisscross way to make these legs. Then you turn the bar of the chainsaw sideways, penetrate in to make this horizontal cut so you can remove those chunks of wood. And that's it. You cut out the legs of the stool. And then when you're somewhat satisfied with it, you just simply make one cut to release it. And there you have a little footstool. And the cool thing about this is you can make it at any height you want. You could make it, say, bar stool size if you would like. Then after that is, of course, the refinements. You see I cut in a little too much here on this part. I was just kind of fooling around to see what I could do. So those are two little easy chainsaw projects if you have an itch like I did on wanting to make something kind of neat with your saw. So we can't talk about Wisconsin forestry history without mentioning Aldo Leopold. I visited the Aldo Leopold's Foundation land, and their manager, Eric Durr, he is the fellow who is in charge of transforming the landscape in the most radical way. And his number one tool for that is the chainsaw. The mission of the foundation is to turn their land holdings, and it's not just their property, they have some adjoining neighbors who have teamed up with them. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds of acres to transform the land into an oak savanna that is beneficial to bird life. They want to restore it to a state where it's pre-colonial. In other words, before the European settlers ever set foot there, that's what they want it to look like. So imagine a vast savanna interspeckled with oak trees and a few other different species. Instead, what they have to work with right now are these super dense forests. What you're looking at here was an area where Durr and his chainsaw crew all cut by hand, and it was a stand of black locusts. They cut it all by hand. Now it's been reseeded, and in a couple years from now, actually right now it should be sprouting up pretty well, but it will look like a beautiful little prairie with Wisconsin native prairie grass and wildflowers mixed with some oak trees that you can kind of see up in the background. We spoke that day at length about some of our common enemies, which is completely taking over Wisconsin forests. And the number one tool to fight this enemy is the chainsaw. The enemies are buckthorn, honeysuckle, Russian olive, autumn olive, Japanese barberry, black locust, and a few others. But those are the most troublesome foes. On my property here in central Wisconsin, I am constantly cutting back buckthorn, honeysuckle, and autumn olive. Those are the biggest problem species for me. They're invasive, they're non-native, and what they specialize in is taking over the mid canopy. So when the sunlight filters through the forest canopy, it hits the invasives and they suck up as much as they can. And if you look, there's a stand of pines near my place, and I looked around and there's not a single pine seedling sprouting because of the thick invasive brush blotting out all sun. They don't have enough photosynthesis to pop up. It's a huge problem. It's a total nightmare, very difficult to eradicate. I sympathize with anyone that has that stuff on their land. If you see it popping up, you got to nip it and kill it right away. So the chainsaw work that they're doing is also killing back all this invasive brush. And they're using the chainsaw. What's strange is when people think you're cutting down trees with a chainsaw, that's bad for nature or something like that. Well, they're using the chainsaw to transform nature. They're removing a lot of these trees that don't belong there, not just invasive non-native species, but trees that have sprouted up there from whatever reason, and they're shaping the land into their vision of an oak savanna. It's a phenomenal project, and they give tours. I highly recommend going down there if you can and checking it out. They do fantastic work. Oh, and besides the chainsaw, they do a lot of controlled burns to beat back all of the invasive brush that tries to grow back. That is one of their key tools in land management, along with the chainsaw. In fact, sometimes they're using the chainsaw while the place is burning and the fire is right next to them. Here's another one, and this is the tracks left by the larva of an emerald ash borer. Ash trees in Wisconsin are dying off. It is an extinction level event. there's really nothing we can do about it. There are some arborists that offer some chemical treatment that will help keep them alive, but I think you're throwing money away. Their death is inevitable. If you're watching this, chances are, if you have children or grandchildren, they're not going to see ash trees in their life. They're going away pretty quick, and it's a shame. So the chainsaw is a tool for removing them. When I worked as a line clearance tree trimmer, we had a policy of not climbing any ash trees, even if they look alive. And they do, even when they're half dead. They have a lot of suckers that sprout up in desperation. So the tree looks kind of greened up, but it's half dead. When the tree is half dead, the wood becomes brittle and it becomes dangerous to climb. So there's a no climb policy with ash trees. They were considered very hazardous trees to work with and to deal with. I just recently felled an ash tree on my property last weekend. And when it hit the ground, it's an explosion of dead twigs. They explode everywhere. And those upper limbs are so brittle. So they're very hazardous. And when I walked around the base of the tree to inspect it and to find an escape route after I did my back cut, I found multiple tree branches on the ground that had broken off and fallen. I was wearing a hard hat. I suggest everyone uses them, especially during the felling process. If any of those branches would have fell and struck my head, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd be cross-eyed and have a concussion if that was the luckiest I got. So these ash trees are all over Wisconsin, and they should be removed. If you have them on your property and know anyone that does, get them down. They're only going to cause trouble down the road. There is a silver lining to these dead ash trees, and that is they are considered one of the finest firewoods in North America. They burn fantastic. They're easy to work with, pretty easy to split, and they produce a pretty solid amount of BTUs in the wood stove. So that's a bonus. And also, it's a wonderful hardwood. So for any type of woodworking project or milling, they're good too. They are hard on a chainsaw. You're going to be resharpening your chain if you're milling them quite often. And there's my book that I wrote. It's Chainsaw Love. It's published by the Wisconsin Historical Society Press. Check it out. It's available online wherever you look. So any questions here? I'm looking at the chat.
Yeah, Tom has a question here. It says, have you ever heard of a logger named Gary Edinger from Kennan? In 2007, he was working alone in a remote area with no cell service and cut his leg off and survived the ordeal. And then he says, oh, did I mention it was below 0 temperatures? He wrote a book called Will to Live, A Saga to Live. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes. He's included in the book on the chapter about chainsaw accidents. He was a very important example in that chapter. What happened is Mr. Edinger was felling, I think it was 2 trees, but the chainsaw did not hurt him. It was the butt end of the tree shifted somehow, and I believe he got his foot, his lower leg pinched between the trunk of the tree and the stump, and it sheared off the lower part of his leg. The chainsaw had nothing to do with it.
Wow, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and he survived. He's a tough, really tough guy.
For
Incredibly
sure.
tough. Yeah, he made it out of there. I think he used his belt as a tourniquet. But here's an important part of that. I did a lot of research about chainsaw accidents, and here's my conclusion. Chainsaws rarely ever kill a person. They only mangle or maim them. What kills people with chainsaws are trees in motion. Those are lethal. So it's often during the felling process, or a log somehow shifts or flips or kicks back at the sawyer. That's what kills people. Chainsaw deaths are very, very rare. You just get really, really badly cut. You apply direct pressure with a sweatshirt, a bandage, anything you can to stop the bleeding, and then you get to a hospital quickly. But a tree that weighs thousands of pounds and that is falling or in motion in some kind of way is pretty much instant death.
Wow. Now that slide that you showed with the injuries, were those injuries just from 1994?
Yeah, gathered at that time.
Okay.
That's when it was published.
Do you know if any of has there been any change over time with all of the advancements in chainsaws, like how people hurt themselves with chainsaws? I would imagine it's probably less frequent than it was before some improvements were made.
Yeah. Actually, it's gotten a lot better with all the safety protocols that are available now. The biggest thing to have are chainsaw chaps. If you're wearing chaps, you'll be fine. I accidentally hit myself with a moving chain while wearing chainsaw chaps. My arms were super tired. I was cutting brush. And I leaned back with the chainsaw kind of by my thighs, and the bar tilted a little bit, and the chain bit into my saw chaps. There was a little rip, and then inside is this Kevlar stuffing. And what that stuffing does is it tangles up the teeth of the saw and immediately seizes it, and it stops instantly. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool technology.
Yeah, that is cool. So another question here in the chat. Alan asked, regarding the injuries to the left hand, might that be due to people using very small saws that they can operate with one hand, leading them to feed the wood into the saw with their left hand?
Yes, I think he's referring to top-handled chainsaws. They're one-handed use. So what happens is for a right-handed person using one of those small one-handed saws, they will reach over with their left hand to stabilize like a tree branch that they're cutting. And sometimes they kind of reach over the area where they're making the cut. So that means they're in the line of fire of those teeth. So yeah, that's probably a good example of why people get cut with their left hand, on their left hand.
Okay. And a question that I had, what was it, like you talk about things that people find as they're cutting through a tree with a chainsaw. If you've heard of anything, okay, we've had deer, bullets that maybe pass through a deer or something like that, but have you heard of anything like super strange being found at all?
Yeah, I interviewed Professor Michael Demchek at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. He's a forestry professor, and he teaches really hands-on chainsaw skills with his students in some workshops. And he told me stories about all kinds of crazy stuff, all kinds of nails, basically all kinds of objects can grow into a tree. I think he said a reflector, like one that you would stick on your driveway that will reflect off of car headlights. One of those things was grown inside of a tree. And imagine hitting that with a saw.
That's kind of neat. Anyone else have any questions for Mr. Card here this evening? Otherwise, Don, I think I can pass it back to you.
All right. If I can get my camera to come on.
There you are.
All right, good. Well, I just like to say I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation tonight, and I want to put a plug in for the book. The Wisconsin Historical Society donated a copy of that book for us to use during our recent fall conference as a door prize. And so I had a chance to page through it, and it is a really well done piece of work. I pulled out the Wisconsin Historical Society Press catalog, and I have just a review from Sebastian Younger. He said, anyone who loves chainsaws will be absolutely enthralled with this book. As a former climber for tree organizations, I know my way around a chainsaw, but I still learned a huge amount. Card is a very fine writer, and the book is a love letter, a practical guide, and a deep history. I mean, I think that's a very nice attribute for a book to have, to hit all those key points. And so I would encourage people to go to the Wisconsin History Press and check out the book there. The ISBN and information about the book was put into the chat. So if anybody's looking for the number, they can jot that down before we end. And with that, thank you, James, for a great presentation. Next month, we have our talk November 19th, just a few days before deer season opens. And the talk is going to be presented by Forest History Association member, Dick Thiel. Dick is one of the renowned experts on the Wisconsin wolf population. And so he's going to talk about our Wisconsin wolves. And that will be on November 19th at 6:30 p.m. The information for signing up for that webinar will be out in the next day or two. And with that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And James.
It was a
Thank you,
pleasure to
James.
be here.
Great talk.
Well, Karen has a note in here. I'm reading the chainsaw book now. I won at the Forest History Annual Association meeting. So thanks to Wisconsin Historical Society. And thank you all.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.